were so special this morning as well, and this needs to be returned to because the audience is fluid, and we have some people, sometimes some people, other times. Is that Julie Sheik? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to do this too. With Jonathan is Julie Hayden from Fox News, and there's a weird story that's starting to spin around about Pat Sullivan and Columbine. Julie, thanks. Good morning. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, good morning, Peter.
And I know you and Chuck will be hosting the morning show on 850 KOA tomorrow morning, you and Chuck Pondewell, and I know this will be part of what you say. John, thank you for coming back, and good morning.
Thank you again.
All right, so, Julie, what is this bizarre Columbine connection?
Well, I don't want to talk a lot about it because we're still kind of working on it, and I haven't, to be honest, verified things, everything. But I was contacted by the parents of one of the Columbine survivors, but one of them was injured pretty severely. And people may remember the Columbine, there was an 11,000-page report. And on one of the pages in the report, and I don't know, Jonathan, I was actually going to talk to you about it, so weigh in if you've heard about this. There is a picture that apparently Eric Harris drew, and it's part of the official Columbine report.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay. At the day that he and Klebold were busted for the vandalism. And in this diagram that he drew, he shows essentially one of them on all fours and a figure wearing a badge, a very clear badge, standing behind them in a position clearly suggesting sexual assault. And
that's right.
There is a lot. Apparently, there was talk during some of the trial. Remember the families sued the families, and some of this I think was has been sealed. A lot of it I think actually has been sealed. But apparently, there was talk that Harris and Klebold described this arrest, which was really simply it was bad, but it was just for vandalism, described this arrest as being hugely traumatic. They had to go into anger management. And there are some who feel that the team's reaction to this van arrest was way out of proportion to a simple, particularly because it wasn't really their first contact with law enforcement, was way out of proportion to the seriousness of the crime, that they were much more traumatized than you would have thought they would have been. And the family of the Columbine survivor that contacted me said that they had, when this came out and they saw this picture, had some personal contact and I think felt like they had personal connections with Pat Sullivan and asked him to look into it and then never, ever, ever heard back from him. I don't think they're suggesting that Pat Sullivan was the person there. It was Jefferson County law enforcement officers, but I think in light of what has come out about Pat Sullivan, I think their position is, well, we now know why he probably never looked into it. Even maybe he wouldn't have anyway. But there's that, and then and also I think it sort of changes to a certain extent the way we look at law enforcement a little bit. I mean, who would have thought Pat Sullivan? And if this is the case, Peter, it really, if this is true, and there is a lot of debate about whether it is or it is, the picture is true.
Sure. No, I've looked at everything since hearing from people about the story, and I heard about it yesterday afternoon. Again, if you're just joining us 9 after the hour, KHOW Radio, Jonathan Elenoff, investigator, Julie Hayden, of course, investigative reporter for Fox, and this story began yesterday. Is there some sort of a bizarre Columbine connection into Pat Sullivan?
Well, and sort of, I think if what this family is saying is true, I think there's clearly a connection, not so much to Pat Sullivan and anything to do with Columbine, but I think, him not looking into it, if there really was a sex assault on Harris or Klebold by one of the officers involved in making this an arrest, and then it kind of, I think, puts a lot of their comments and their writings into an entirely new perspective and, frankly, could shift the entire way we as a nation look at Columbine. Forever it's been thought of, frankly, as the school's fault for not protecting the boys from bullying and things like that. Well, this would shift it onto much more broadly onto the shoulders of potential law enforcement. If these boys were acting in part out of vengeance or trauma or anger, which is pretty common, at having been sexually assaulted during the course of an arrest, that changes, to me at least, I think that would significantly shift the way we view Columbine.
Jonathan.
Yeah, that's right actually, to what I had come across with, people that gave me information. I found people were claiming that, yes, there was an alleged officer possibly, or at least somebody dressed with a badge, that they believed this image depict, and the image depict, anal sex, I guess is the term, or sodomy. Right. I don't know if that's allowed to be said. You're probably going to have to bleep me on that. But I don't know. I when I looked at the drawing, it was pretty clear to me that, that's someone being raped. And it was 3 what looks like police cars drawn, pulled up what would be along a fence. And this was a document that Jeffco put in their massive stack of papers released, and this was drawn by, and I forget which one either Eric.
I think it's Harris. Is what the picture that I saw, and the description that goes with it, along with the. You can look at it. Shoot, you want me to tell you what page, Peter?
Yeah, we're going to put it up on the website here in just a second.
Oh, okay. So you already know. You can look at it, and it's. I guess the question becomes, what was ever done about that?
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's like, clearly, I think we all understand why Pat Sullivan wasn't going to look into it. But what did Jeffco ever do? And the baby is here. But, what did Jeffco ever do about it? And I know all along from the beginning, and Peter, you know this, there have been a lot of questions about the way, from the first response on, to the way that the whole Columbine situation was handled. I know we tried repeatedly back in the day when I was over at Channel 7 to talk to the investigator who handled some of those, not the Columbine stuff, but who handled some of those earlier law enforcement contacts with Harrison people, who police went on to use as informants, investigating some kind of computer stuff going on at the high school. And he disappeared. We could never, we traced him, but he left the state, would never return phone calls, would never answer any questions at all about those early investigations.
When I first heard this yesterday afternoon from a source other than you two guys, we went and looked, and when we hit hold here for the pause, Sheik will talk to you guys, and we'll get that picture up on the on our website so people can see it. What struck me, Julie, is, I've had so many conversations with men and women in law enforcement away from obviously all of this who need anonymity to speak, and I obviously, but you think about this, and you're bright, and John's bright, and you guys have lived this, so we know the timeline. Carol Chambers smartly gets herself out of this because no matter what, it's going to have a bad ending for her, and she doesn't want this blowing back on her, so she says, look, let the chips fall where they may, and I really admire her for that. So then Governor John Hickenlooper, on January the 18th, 2012, signs an executive order, and that executive order gives this to John Suthers. Suthers forms a task force. On that task force, we believe, are 22 law enforcement officers and all the extra cops that they need when they need them. It is a task force of Arapahoe County Sheriffs, Aurora Police Department, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, Denver Police, FBI, Jefferson County Sheriff's Task Force, and South Metro Drug Task Force. Now, 22 full-time officers, as many part-time as they need. They do a 60-plus day investigation, spend millions of dollars, and come back with nothing. I don't believe it. I throw the BS flag right at all of it. But at the same time, and I'm going to set a question up, and you two come back, and you're going to tell the Sheik off air about that page. But what I think is fascinating is I talked to a couple of narcotics cops yesterday, and they said if they wanted to get Pat, they would have gotten Pat. Jonathan believes it was predestined how the bust went down. But all they would have to do, they got these young prostitutes. They had them flipped. All they had to do is keep setting Pat up for buys, just like they would have done to a guy in the hood, like they'd have done to a guy on South Broadway, like they'd have done anywhere. You make a small buy. You make a bigger buy. You befriend the guy, you make even bigger buys, and then you make the big buy, and then you get everybody involved in the network. They chose not to do it that way. They chose to take him down with this sick individual in a room with 2 other guys. Now, why didn't they narc him out like they would anybody else? And they didn't do that. And these guys said they led them to believe that they well-intentioned plan never to have a trial that would be full-blown or hammer him with a big beef. Interesting stuff, isn't it? Guys?
Yes, it is interesting. And I'll tell you this. I looked at a lot of documents, actually about a giant box of documents that somebody handed me, and I looked into what people were saying about, the failed parts of this investigation that they saw, where charges should have been brought up, where they weren't, how this should have gone down, where,
they
standard protocols, stuff like that.
They could have. With the South Metro Task Force, all these other agencies, they could have taken him down like they would take anybody else down. They chose not to. Put you both on hold. Hang on a second. Julie Hayden, Jonathan Elenoff, Sheik, 16 after the hour of 8, 8:16, KHAL Radio. Traffic, here's Susan. All right, it's 23 minutes after the hour of 8, 8:23. That page from the Columbine report is now up on our website, KHOW.com. And does it depict someone with a star standing behind someone down on all fours? Are they being violated sexually? And what does it mean? The drawings were that, of course, of Eric and Dylan. Online with us, Julie Hayden from Fox News, and the Rev, her son, and also with us, of course, Jonathan Elenoff. It is 6:30 KHOW. There's the man.
There he is. We're gonna hand him to the dad.
First, good luck with that.
Yeah.
So, and I set that question up about whether, would the cops and that many police officers and everything involved and millions of dollars spent coming back with nothing. And it's hard to believe it. And Jonathan and I spoke about it earlier. I'm having him back because of this picture with Columbine. But we're looking at the report. Is it conceivable, Julie? You understand these documents, and Jonathan does. I would like to see the results of John Souther's Sullivan investigation. All the reports written by all these various law enforcement agencies. That'd be beauty to see.
Oh, yeah, and really I think intend, if we haven't already, to file a Freedom of Information Act request to see them, which I doubt we'll get.
I doubt you'll get them also.
Because
a lot of documents are missing, too,
Yeah. You're right, Peter. I know that there has been some speculation, and I think it's possible that maybe because, certainly something was going on back in Chambers when they were having that lengthy discussion before they announced the plea agreement. Where afterwards, where the judge comes out and says, no, I'm not bound to accept this, and, there's been no promise.
Would you do me a favor? Because a lot of people, we were speaking about it yesterday. We tried to get a hold of you. I know you were busy. How the deal goes down. Here's Judge Sylvester. Here is the Attorney General. He is John Souther's representative, and then the defense team for Pat.
Right.
What happened?
And so it's in court, and by now we've all heard it's the disposition hearing, and everybody has heard as expected, that there was going to be a plea bargain in the case, and it's clear, listening to the lawyers kind of sitting around in court before the whole thing starts, that there is a plea agreement. They're talking about Pat signing documents and things like that, and stipulations and things. And then they all go back into Chambers, which is unusual. What is there to talk about in Chambers? And I think particularly with plea deals, where you want to make sure that there's no really even an appearance of something being worked out, so to speak. And then about 20 minutes later, they come back, and then they do the deal. They announce that they reached a plea agreement, and they say what it is. But the judge first starts out by explaining to Pat that he's not under any obligation to accept the plea agreement.
Why wouldn't he?
Well, yeah, and it was like, well, wouldn't you have mentioned that to them in Chambers then,
Yeah.
And that there's no promises been made, or if there have been made, he's not bound by any sentencing decisions either. And it was just kind of, like I said, I'm sitting there as a skeptical reporter thinking, well, what were you exchanging recipes back there then? What were we all talking about for 20 minutes?
They were making a deal.
Well, yeah, and I personally, I think probably some things were being explained to the judge about why they reached this deal, and the way they reached it, that they didn't want to become public. Now, there has been speculation that it was discussing sensitive medical issues. For instance, there's been a lot of rumors, and it certainly probably wouldn't surprise anyone if Pat Sullivan was HIV positive. But I'm not sure what that would have to do with anything. Jails accept HIV positive
all
the
time. All the time.
And there was some